Alright guys, welcome to another episode of Project E30. Got a little bit of time in the shop today, so I'm going to try and get the bottom end crank and bearings into the 318 block. So I had the block to the machine shop, cleaned it, and it's already been measured. Everything's been measured on this block. So as far as bearing clearances and everything, we've already done test fit of we've measured the crank and we've measured the journals and everything, so we're good to go that way. So what we need to do, first thing we need to do, I've already pulled the main caps off, so we're gonna install the main bearings. So part number is an H629/5 standard, and it's for an M10 4-cylinder from 1961 to 1988. Get these out. Okay, so basically what you want to do is you want to just line up the ear on there. There's an ear on the block. You just drop the bearing in. Now the center bearing is for the thrust washer. So you put the thrust in there. And the way you know that is on the third. If you look at the third cam cap, there's a raised section here, and that's for the thrust bearing to sit in. Okay, so we've got our lower main bearings installed. Now we want okay, so we've got our main bearings installed, lowers, well actually uppers when you turn the motor over. So now what we're going to use is this is Lucas assembly lube. So just put some in the middle. Don't go crazy, but sorry about that, the camera battery died. So yeah, so we put the assembly lube in and just smear it out so that you've got good coverage there. Put a little more in the middle here. This is just so that you don't fire it up right away, it can sit for a little while. So now what we're going to do is we're going to grab the crank and we're going to drop it in there. rust here. This crank already went through the ultrasonic machine, so you know it's all clean and you want to put it in the right way. So So the crank is now situated in the block. So now what we want to do, put the cam caps back in, or the crank main bearing caps back in. So we're just going to do the same thing with the bearings. Make sure you line up the ear on the bearing. Put the assembly lube on. Okay, so our third cap, remember this is our thrust washer. Okay, number 4. Couldn't remember if it was 16 or 17. 17 millimeter. So just going to tighten those down until stops, hand tight. I'm going to crank on them. Because I didn't take this engine apart, so I want to make sure that everything is good to go before we start cranking things, torquing things with spec. Make sure that the crank spins freely in there. So at this point we've got the crank in there. The crank should turn nice and easy, which it does. Shouldn't have any end-to-end play, which we don't. So now what we're going to do, we're going to come back, we're going to torque the main caps to spec, and then we're going to start working on the pistons and rods. So I'll bring you back once I've got torque wrench and everything set up. Okay, so we got the torque wrench, 17 millimeter, and we're going to set the torque wrench to 45 foot-pounds. Okay, I'm just going to torque. I still like to torque it in a cross pattern or end to end. Center. Make sure you refer to your service manual or for your engine torques. Okay, so now we'll just go down, make sure they're all good. And one thing is, when you're building an engine, check your work. So there's two things: cleanliness, cleanliness, cleanliness. You can't never be too clean of when you're assembling an engine. And second is always check to make sure that through every step of the process you're still able to turn the engine. So that's torqued to spec now, and the crankshaft rotates nice and smooth. There's no play. There's no play, slight play that way, but we've already measured end play when the motor came apart. So we put new thrust washers in, and that's basically putting the crankshaft into the bottom end. So now from this point what we need to do is we need to get our pistons prepped. So we've got to put our rings on, and then once we put the rings on, then we will load the rod bearings onto the end of the rods, and we'll get them into there, into the block, and just keep cleaning everything as you're assembling it. Just so my suggestion is you put one piston in, tighten it up, rotate the engine, make sure that you're still able to rotate the engine, because if you put something in the wrong way, you'd rather find out when you do it than down the road when you've got all 4 pistons installed. Okay. Okay, so now our next step is we're going to load our piston rings onto our pistons. And one thing just to note before we move on here is that always use high quality engine parts. So the main bearings we used were Glyco. Our rod bearings are Kolbenschmidt SKs, and we're using Goetze rings. So use all high quality, made in Germany, or these ones are made in Poland, but yeah, so use high quality engine parts when you're rebuilding, and you're going to have a lot better luck. So alright, so let's get going on our rings here. So when you open the package of a ring set, it's going to be usually three envelopes, okay? And it's going to tell you which ring goes where. So you always want to start at the bottom ring. So in our case, this is an oil control ring, and if you look at the ring, there's nothing on it that says top. So we'll just look here at the so just has a Goetze, and there's no specific top on the oil control ring. There'll definitely be top and bottom here. So what we want to do is I just like to it's kind of hard to keep it on the camera. I don't want to break the ring. So basically what we do is we just walk it down the side of the piston, and we'll get it into the oil control slot. So basically what I like to do is just keep it slightly on an angle when you're putting the ring on, and what that will do is it allows it so that the oil control ring doesn't fall into one of the other grooves. So just work it down like that. And that's how we get the oil control ring on. Okay, so now we're going to go, this is our number 2 ring here. So this will be a second middle groove, and you can see here it's marked top. So this is important that this is on the top. Okay, we'll just do the same thing with these rings. There is tools that they make to install rings, but I find that if I'm careful, I don't have any problems, and I can get the ring down there. So, okay, so there's our second ring, and then our top ring also says top on it there. So we do the same thing here. And you want to make sure that once you've got all these rings in, that they move freely in the gaps. These pistons and rods were ultrasonically cleaned, but if you don't have an ultrasonic machine, you can when you take the old rings out, just use a broken piece of the old ring and you can run it through the groove and that'll clean them out. Okay, so we'll check, make sure we got our 2 circlips in on our wrist pin. Okay, and then the next step we're going to do is we're going to install our rod bearings. Just remove the nuts and the rod cap. And you can remove the cap. Just make sure that you're putting it back on the same way. So we set our piston down there. And again, the same as the main caps. You've got a little ear there. Okay. So we always keep laying it down the same way so that we don't get them mixed up. Okay. So now at this point, what we need to do is we need to get some oil. And we need to oil down the piston rings. We'll get the piston ring. We need a compressor so that we can get these into the cylinder. And so there's a special tool for that, and then we'll go ahead and we'll install one of these, and I'll get you set up when we're up on top of the block here. Okay, so we've got the engine flipped over now, and we're going to install the number 1 cylinder piston, into the number 1 cylinder. And so if you look here on the top of the piston, there's an arrow. That arrow's got to face the front of the motor, so it's got to sit like that. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to make sure that these gaps in the rings all don't line up. Okay, so I like to usually put these two 180 apart. Some engines specify an exact way that the rings are supposed to go. And then we just put a little bit of oil. So this is just engine oil. I'm going to just lubricate everything, make sure we're good. I just want to put a couple shots of oil into the cylinder. Lubricate that out, make sure we're not dry there. This block has been jet washed, so all the oil is out of the cylinder walls. Okay, so just do it like that. Then we've got our piston ring compressor. So what we do, get that, get it open. So we just want to kind of get it square on the piston. Heard a little bit of a weird noise there when I was tightening it up, so shouldn't be going to break a ring or something. Should be fine, but we're good. Just the way the just so it's tight enough but loose enough that it'll move. Okay, and we've got to remove our cap. Put a little bit of use assembly lube in the rod bearing. And if you don't feel confident that you can drop this straight down, you put the lobe of the crankshaft at the very bottom. You can cover these up with rubber hoses, but if you're careful and you drop it straight down, it should be fine. Okay. So make sure you're lined up there. Just going to tighten this down a little more. And we just use a plastic hammer and we can, it looks like we're at the ring. And it's so, just gotta make sure we get this tight enough that and we're in. Okay, so that's the first one in. And so now what we want to do, we just want to push it down. And what we'll do is we'll turn the engine over. And you just reach down, grab the bottom of the rod and pull it up. And you can pull it right around the lobe there. So that's why we pre-lubed it. Now I've also marked the cam caps so that they go in a specific position. Get some more lubrication in there. So I put green mark there and it lines up with a green mark on the bottom of the rod. These are, I believe they're 15s, but .14mm. And the torque spec on 4-cylinder M10s is 40 foot-pounds for the rod. One, two. Okay, so again, like I said, make sure everything spins properly. Remember, you're going to get rolling more resistance from every time you add another rod, you're gonna get more resistance. So I'll just turn this over and show you. So we get the piston. These pistons actually come out of the top of the head. There you go. So our arrow faces forward. We've got one piston in. So I'm going to assemble the rest of these, get them all in, and I'll bring you back for the next thing we're going to do. Alright, so we've got 3 piston and rod combos into the block. Just working on the last one. I just wanted to say one thing about piston rings. So we're building a stock M10 here. This engine only makes 102 horsepower. And if you're building a boosted engine, anything forced induction, supercharger, turbo, or anything like high performance, you're going to want to measure your ring end gaps. So the way you do that is you put the ring into the bore and push it down, say ½ an inch into the bore, and then you measure, and then you can file the piston rings. But basically, because we're not doing a high performance engine, we're just doing a stock rebuild. I've had the bores measured, the pistons were checked, and all the bearing clearances were checked, so we don't need to worry about end gapping the piston rings. So I just wanted to mention that, because in a high performance application you certainly do want to make sure that you have the right end gap, because under a boosted application you're going to have a lot more cylinder pressure, and it's not only for oiling but for to make sure that you don't have a ring close up on you. So just a quick note about that. So I'm just going to get this one all ready to go. We've got the 3 rings on. Just going to put the final 2 rod. I just like measuring or marking stuff so that when I take it apart I make sure it goes back in the same orientation. And like I said, make sure everything is clean. All these parts have been washed, but quick wipe down. Put our assembly lube in. We're going to oil down our rings. Our rings all oiled down there. Now we're just going to rotate our rings to make sure that we've got, don't have any end gaps lined up. Put our ring compressor on. And then our arrow. Get you back here. Okay, we've already oiled our cylinder walls. Arrow points to the front. Put our piston into our cylinder. And our piston, final piston is in. Push. Make sure it's all the way into the cylinder. Down. Pull the rod up into the journal. This rod cap bearing in. There. On the M10, the bearing ears are both on the same side, so there's our mark. Our mark's there. Drop that on. And again, torque to 40 foot-pounds. We'll check our number 1 cylinder. Okay. Kind of hard to turn because we've got teeth on the timing chain. Check the torque on number 2 and number 3. And that's how you assemble the bottom end of an M10. So the next steps we're going to have is we're going to clean the block, the outside, make sure we get any oil residue off. I've still got to install the freeze plugs, and then we'll be done with it. So we're just going to shoot the block with some Duplicolor. I like low gloss black, and then we'll install the freeze plug. There's one side. Switch over to the other side. A little bit in the back here. It's all about where you angle it too. I mean, you don't have to mask this off because you could just spray from underneath and it doesn't. You just want to make sure that you get both sides of all the bosses. And I don't like painting anything in the front or the back because this is a oil area here. So as long as we get in here, we're good to go. And then our timing covers will go on. So that's basically where I'm going to stop today. We got the block painted, we've got the crank installed, we've got our pistons and rods installed, and everything's torqued. And so next time what we'll do is we'll get the oil pump on, we'll get the oil pan on, we'll start working on the timing, and hopefully by then I might actually do another video that deals with just the cylinder head. So we've got to get the cylinder head all ready to go, and then once we put the head on, then we can do all the timing. So alright guys, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it, hope you learned something, and leave me a comment below or a question, and I'll try and answer them as much as I can. Thanks again, see you next time. So just a quick little update to the engine bottom end assembly today. I thought something was a little funny when I was assembling the engine and the pistons were coming way too far out of the block. Like, it looked weird to me. I wasn't sure what was going on. So, as I said in one of the previous videos, when I purchased all this E30 stuff, it was all supposed to be 318 stuff. So, by doing a little bit of research and trying to figure things out of why this was happening, because you couldn't even put the head on, it turns out that that crankshaft that I installed was actually a 2-liter crank. So it's from either an E21 or a BMW 2002, which makes sense because the guy that I got all this stuff from had a bunch of 2002 parts, but he said that he had them all separated and somebody else bought all the 2002 parts. So it looks like somehow I've ended up with a 2-liter crank, and I'm hoping that I've got a 1.8 crank somewhere in the rest of the stash of stuff. Because the only other option I have right now is to use the 2-liter crank, but then I have to buy custom pistons to run the 1.8 head, because the dome on the piston obviously hits the head. So just a little update there. Everything else, the assembly wise, everything else is the same as what was correct and what was in the video, except for the fact that it was a 2-liter 80mm stroke crank instead of a 71. So it yeah, so basically I'm going to have to try and locate either a 1.8 crank or go with 2-liter pistons, but 2-liter custom pistons. But because the car is going to have collector plates, I need to figure out if it's which route I should go. So anyways, just a quick update, and we'll see you next time, and hopefully I'll have a resolution to this crankshaft problem. Thanks.